If I live, I'm going to hell. I'm making this video because at some point in my life, I would needed it just to understand what was happening inside my own mind. If you doubting inside and if you just left and you feel lost, if you left years ago but the guilt still shows up sometimes, this is for you. Let's go back to when I was 16. At that time, I was questioning my life and my relationship with God. I felt the need to be close to Him. And for me, love meant obedience. So I used to think, how can you love God and not follow His rules? So I followed them. I wasn't just someone who believed, I was someone who practiced. I didn't eat certain foods. I prayed. I avoided certain celebrations, blah blah blah, and a lot of other stuff. I was serious about it. But then something happened. I grew up. And growth is inconvenient. At 20 years old, my opinions evolved. My ambitions evolved. My worldview evolved. And suddenly, what I wanted for my life and what God supposedly wanted for me didn't align anymore. That's when something really uncomfortable happens. Not rebellion, dissonance. I still believed, but I started to bending the rule like most of believers do. We're human, we're not perfect. I repent later. That verse was contextual. We're very creative when we want to do what we want to do. Then one day when I was 25, something unexpected happened. I started to feel remorse because it had been several years since I had slowly stopped practicing the way I used to. My relationship with God had become distant. I was not practicing, I believe in God. That felt inconsistent. So I told myself, if God values knowledge, then I should study my religion properly. So I did it. I started taking classes. I started studying seriously. And that's when everything shifted. I wasn't the naive 16 years old anymore. At 25, you have more life experience, more critical thinking, more perspective. And the more I learned, the more uncomfortable I became. Because I couldn't ignore the contradictions I was hearing, the lack of logic, the gaps. That when it happened, I started to doubt. When you're raised to believe that doubt is dangerous, that moment feels almost forbidden. But I did it anyway. I dared to doubt. Here's something very interesting about religion. You're allowed to ask questions, but only the right kind of questions. The ones that lead back to the same conclusion. The moment your doubt becomes independent research, that's when it becomes dangerous. Because doubt leads to thinking. Thinking leads to comparison. Comparison leads to autonomy. And autonomy is not very compatible with systems built on opinions. I remember being in Spain and I was deep doubt. I didn't want this religion anymore. But I was still there. Why? Not love. But that time my love for God was gone. It was fear. Fear of hell. It's fascinating how powerful fear can be. I had already detached emotionally, but psychologically, I was still trapped. I remember thinking, what if it's true? What if I'm about to ruin my eternity? If I live, I'm going to hell. That's how strong conditioning is. You can stop believing emotionally, but still be controlled mentally. When I came back to France, I made a decision. I told myself, I don't want this religion anymore. And I remember thinking something very extreme. I would rather go to hell and be tortured for eternity than staying in this religion for 1 second. At that moment, I still believed it might be true. I still felt like I was committing a grave sin. I still felt the weight of it. But something inside was stronger than fear. I didn't want to follow rules that no longer aligned with my values. I didn't want to live in constant internal conflict. It didn't respect my integrity, my vision, my moral compass. So I told myself, if eternal punishment is the price for being aligned with who I truly am, then I take it. Because staying would have been the bigger betrayer of myself. After that decision, I didn't stop. I kept educating myself, studied where religion came from, their history, their evolution, the social political context behind them. I exposed myself to perspectives I never allowed myself to explore before. And over time, something became very clear to me. What I once thought as divine truth started to look very human, very constructed, very strategic. And little by little, the fear disappeared. The sacredness disappeared. And eventually, so did God. Now, let's talk about you. Whether you doubting silently, recently left, or left years ago but still feel echoes, there is one common thing: identity collapse. Because religion doesn't just give you beliefs, it gives you what to eat, how to dress, what's moral, what's immoral, who to date, who to avoid, what's allowed to think. It shapes your entire framework. So when you live, it's not just belief you lose, it's structure. And structure feels safe, even when it suffocates you. You know it's not for you anymore, but you stay. Because admitting it would also mean something deeper. That you gave years of your life to something that no longer represents you. Something you defended with your whole heart. Something that shaped when you were at your most vulnerable. And maybe even something you never truly examined. You sacrificed things. Maybe you didn't date. Maybe you distanced from people who were not devoted enough. Maybe you cut off friendships because they didn't share your faith. You avoided certain foods, certain experiences, certain version of yourself. You spend a lot of minutes, hours, years praying. Maybe you even shaped your career around it, your lifestyle, the city you choose to live in. Maybe you got married. Maybe you built a family. And now you're standing there thinking, I don't want to be religious anymore. And that realization hurts because time doesn't rewind. You can reclaim those years. You can't undo those choices. And it's painful to admit that so much of what you built was heavily influenced by a vision that wasn't entirely yours. Now you have freedom, and that's terrifying because for years, morality was external. Right and wrong were defined for you. Now it's internal. And here's a question nobody really likes to sit with. Why do some people need divine surveillance to behave ethically? Don't worry. You're not suddenly going to wake up tomorrow and start doing selling your body or living recklessly just because you don't believe anymore. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and suddenly use your moral compass. There are things that are simply part of your personality. Your character doesn't disappear the moment belief does. For example, I don't date. Not because a religion tells me not to do, because I personally don't see the point right now. And the day I do, I will. And to be honest, even when I was religious, I used to talk to men. I stopped, not because of faith, but because I found it draining, annoying. For me, it feels like a waste of time. There are people who are still religious and still act in ways that contradict everything they claim to believe. So clearly, belief alone isn't what makes someone ethical. The truth is, This level of freedom is not comfortable for everyone. When no one is watching, when no divine authority is evaluating you, when your decisions are entirely your own, that kind of responsibility can feel heavy because now it's on you. Your actions, your standards, your integrity. Not everyone is comfortable with that. But if you're here, if you listened this far, if you're questioning instead of reacting, I'm going to assume you're capable of handling your own freedom. And that's powerful. So, here's something else. Hope I hope it helps. God is not going to shake your house. He's not going to punish you in your dreams. He's not going to send demons after you just because you decide to stop believing. If centuries of wars, injustice, slavery didn't trigger immediate divine intervention, I doubt your personal doubt will. You can sleep peacefully, nothing is coming for you. The fear feels real, but fear is not evidence. You're allowed to think, and thinking is not a crime. So we talked about fear. We talked about doubt. We talked about that moment before the big decision. But now you've officially made the decision, and then what? Because you just lost a huge part of yourself, or at least that's what it feels like. But here's something I've realized. The official decision is rarely the real beginning. Most of the time, the decision was made long before, emotionally, unconsciously. We just buried it. Because acknowledging it will mean three very uncomfortable things. First, it will mean admitting we were committing a sin. It will mean admitting we were wrong. And that years were invested in something that no longer fit. Third, it would mean losing a huge part of our identity. In my case, I think I knew for years. Deep down, I knew something didn't align, but I buried it. Because 98% of my friends were religious at the time. Living wouldn't just mean changing beliefs. It would mean rejection, judgment, isolation. I was 20, 21. So I forced myself to not feel it, to not question it. Maybe my brain was protecting me because one day, out of nowhere, I started ghosting them all. I stopped replying. I left the groups. Then I went to college. I started working. And I'm a curious person. So I started being exposed to different perspectives, different lifestyles, different ways of thinking. And without the constant weight of a religious circle around me, I slowly started building my adult identity, even though I still believed at the time. So when I officially left at 25, my identity crisis wasn't catastrophic because I had already started forming myself. Leaving just removed the final layer. And most importantly, guilt starting fading. I wasn't constantly thinking, I'm doing this, but God disapproves. I had a moment of, who am I now? But it passed. It fades quickly. Deconstruction takes time. You have to unlearn things. And you don't even realize how deeply certain ideas shaped you until life confronts you with everyday situations. For example, for years, I refused to even look into the theory of evolution. So in my mind, humanity started with Adam and Eve. That had to be ruined. Political options I thought were mine turned out to be inherited from doctrine. Opinion on abortion, on people of other religions, on atheists, on women in society. I had to dismantle everything, piece by piece. And maybe I'm still doing it. You don't know how much of your perception was shaped for you until you start thinking without permission. Here's something interesting. Sometimes you didn't know yet, but some people around you did. They could see it didn't quite fit. For example, I've always been someone who questions things in life. Why it is like that? Why isn't it logical? just because everyone agrees. Does that mean I do? I like to think for myself. I've always had strong opinions, especially about women, about autonomy. Some friends later told me, "You were never really built for that kind of structure." At the time, that would have shocked me. Because I genuinely believed I will stay religious my whole life. I had built an identity around that version of me. But when you step back, when you take distance from your own story, you start seeing the inconsistencies. The subtitle misalignment that was always there. And one day you think, actually, it makes sense. So, if you're going through this, you're not crazy, you're not evil, you're not broken, you're thinking. And thinking is uncomfortable, but growth actually is. So, thank you so much for watching. Like this video, give a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you soon. Bye bye.